All right, we've got Jay Goldberg here. He's our guy in Ontario. And it's interesting. We just got a new cabinet after the election. Pablo Rodriquez is the new Minister of Heritage. I don't think Minister Rodriguez even figured out where his desk was before Jay was publishing advice for him right in the National Post. He's right there ready. I'm going to read a quote from that National Post column, and here it is. Rarely in the history of Confederation have so many from so many points on the political spectrum been so unified in opposition to one specific policy. Before the last election, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government's proposed internet regulations provoked opposition from journalists, academics, civil liberties groups, women's advocacy groups, organizations, libertarians, privacy experts, think tanks, concerned citizens, and scores of others. I just about ran out of breath just reading the list.
Yeah.
All right, Jay, you and I have made careers out of getting mad at government. This is kind of what we do every day when we wake up. But librarians, they don't really have a reputation for losing their cool. Are you serious about this? Are librarians really getting into this particular fight?
Yeah, the librarians are riled up. The librarians know that this legislation is a real threat to free speech in Canada. They've spoken up about it, as have people, as you noted, from so many different groups. And there's a lot of groups, including LEAF, which is generally an organization that is in the Trudeau Liberals' corner, that have come up very strongly against this. And you're seeing, as you said, we've made a bit of a career out of getting mad at government, but you're seeing librarians, who of course you never expect to get angry at anybody other than those who still owe their overdue books, but they're riled up. So are people who are, more usually friendly to this Liberal government. So I think that they've really poked the eye of a lot of people all across the country. And I think Mr. Rodriguez has an opportunity here to pull back a little bit. Obviously they campaigned during the election, wanting to keep certain things, but there are really a lot of important changes that can be made at the margins that Pablo Rodriguez should look at.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading what the librarians were writing about this. I'm going to fire in a quote on that.
Quote, yeah.
Yeah, the Canadian Association of Research Libraries is concerned the proposed approach may result in significant over removal of content. It's interesting reading it. They were looking at it. You really could have automated systems just pulling down content, even though it's not offensive. Maybe it's even going after or criticizing offensive content, but it's just getting pulled down on a broad brush. But that means we need to take a step back here, Jay. Not everybody's a nerd like us and reading this kind of stuff. We're really talking about Bill C-10 here, although it'll probably get a new number if and when it's reintroduced. But for the time being, Bill C-10, what is it? What does it do?
So Bill C-10 was originally designed, according to the Liberal government, essentially to promote Canadian content online. They wanted to have organizations like Netflix, Amazon Prime, show a certain amount of Canadian content and then get some CanCon revenue for those industries, of course. That on its face was a goal, and that's something that the European Union has done. So there's a model there that the government could have followed, but they decided to also go after what's called user-generated content. And that's the kind of things that if you or I post a video on YouTube, there would then be regulations from the government about what percentage of videos that are showing up on YouTube channels that need to have Canadian content. And so essentially, the government's messing with your news feeds, whether it's on YouTube or a lot of other different social media, such as Twitter or Facebook. So if you're starting to mess up our feeds, that's a huge overreach in terms of civil liberties, and it really opens the door to the possibility that the government could reorder content, not necessarily for just CanCon reasons, but also stuff that's critical of the government. And so that's why a lot of people are really scared about the proposals here. And as I said, there's an approach in Europe that they focus on Europe or European Union-based content. There is a quota there, but it does not go after user-generated content at all. And Professor Michael Geist, who of course we know very well, law professor at the University of Ottawa, he said there is no other country in the world that tries to censor through broadcast regulations like the Trudeau government was trying to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We could really have a good debate about CanCon and whether you should be funneling money to some of these artists or so-called artists. That's a good debate. We should have that debate. I think, you know what, I'm going to tip the scale a little bit and say there's a lot of ways to waste money doing that, but that is a different debate. When you get into saying which content should be seen by who, and you're getting government's fingers into that, that's not a good thing. We shouldn't be worried about whether the government's going to be okay with it before we hit post on our Facebook or YouTube. Okay, so listen, that's where the situation was at the moment. But then all of a sudden, everything kind of came to a screeching halt for this super necessary election that everybody seemed to almost forget about the moment it was over. What happened to Bill C-10 in terms of process?
Well, what happens is, after every election, the parliament's dissolved, and so all the legislation dies. And so what the Liberals are going to have to do now is reintroduce all of the legislation. And what that means is there's an opportunity now. Minister Rodriquez will be tasked with introducing the new legislation with these CanCon rules. The Liberals have signaled they want to go forward with it. But he now has an opportunity. And of course, as you said, this super necessary election where it's going to end up being probably over 2 months between the election and when Parliament comes back. So not exactly a real sense of urgency there. But Minister Rodriquez has a chance to rework the legislation a little bit. As we said, there are ways at the margins, if you're still wanting to go after Canadian content, but making sure you don't go after user-generated content like our YouTube videos. So there's definitely some ways at the margins that the Liberals can make some meaningful changes. If they're still determined to go forward with this CanCon, as you said, let's have a debate about Canadian content and regulation. But we shouldn't be having a debate about whether or not the government can choose what we see on our news feeds and on YouTube. And so it presents a real opportunity here. The legislation has to be reintroduced anyway. So now is the time to craft it a little bit differently.
Okay. But you're kind of a know-it-all. You're telling the minister how to do his business. That's what we pay you to do. So let's do it. What advice do you have for the minister? What should Minister Rodriquez be doing here?
Well, look, he's got to hit the pause button. There was a consultation process. So in tandem with Bill C-10, the government was also looking at a new online harms proposal, and they had the proposal come out right before the election. They had a consultation period, but the consultation happened during the election. It was so rushed that, for example, Facebook, which is going to face significant regulation through these both pieces of legislation, Facebook didn't even submit anything to the process because it was so rushed. And of course, the government wasn't able to pay a lot of attention because they were busy out running for re-election. And with that online harms proposals, there's some very dangerous stuff in there. They're talking about requiring social media companies to take things down potentially within 24 hours of something being flagged. And that's, as you're saying, that it could create a culture of takedown where companies like Facebook or Twitter could face millions of dollars of fines. They don't take something down within 24 hours. And so it's going to err on a culture of takedown because, these companies are not going to want to leave themselves open to being fined millions and millions of dollars. So there's a lot of very real problems here that could create major headaches and really threaten freedom of speech. So Bill C-10 needs to be reworked to get that user-generated content element out of there. I think the government needs to go back to the drawing board, indefinitely giving more than 24 hours and threatening millions of dollars of fines before you start talking about, a culture of takedown for anything that's online and anything that someone just alleges could be hateful content. So the government has really rushed this. They've just won re-election. Obviously this legislation wasn't so urgent that it had to go within a matter of weeks because they called the election. And now they haven't even come back to Parliament Hill for weeks and weeks after the election. So there's no excuse for Minister Rodriquez to turn around and say, we've got to jam this through right when we get back to Parliament, because we've had weeks and months of delay anyway and no action. And so they really need to sit down, have a genuine consultation process where you talk to all of the stakeholders. I mean, there's no way you should be regulating social media companies and not have Facebook, which is one of the largest social media companies, involved in the conversation, We've heard concerns from so many different groups all across civil society. And so this is a time for hitting the pause button, have a meaningful consultation, maybe wait a few months, do the process right, and then, come up with a new proposal. But in the EU, it took them years to come up with their legislation that ultimately had those European Union content rules. And that was years of negotiation and listening to parties from all over the place. And so that's exactly what the Trudeau government should do. And so it's definitely time to hit the pause button.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you're referencing Professor Michael Geist from the University of Ottawa. We had a chance to chat with him a little bit. Almost makes me want to go back to university and take some classes, because guys like that, wow, you can get smarter faster. He pointed out that first of all, the government needs to be listening to folks like him and taking their time to listen, because this guy understands it better than just about anybody else. But he was pointing out that not only did groups like Facebook not even make a proposal, they should be on the record. They should have to publicly say what they think is good and bad, so that we can all criticize it, agree with it, disagree with it, or whatever, have a conversation about it. He pointed out that in the so-called consultation, a lot of the presentations from other major players were never made public. So it's backroom stuff about freedom of speech. That's not how this works. We have to have an open and fulsome debate, especially when issues of censorship and free speech come up. Okay, let's get your crystal ball out, though. Where do you see this going? What's going to happen next?
Well, look, I think the legislation is definitely going to be reintroduced in some form. Minister Rodriguez has said that he intends to do so, and the Trudeau Liberals definitely indicated during the election that they want to do that. But I think that there is an opportunity, as I said, to deal with some of the really, really controversial elements at the margins. I don't think it's too much to ask the Liberal government to think about this a little bit before they pass it, listen to experts. I mean, people like Professor Michael Geist are not inherently upset with the government all the time on every subject. We're often very critical of the government, but as we said off the top, there's a lot of groups that usually want to work with the government, cooperate with the government, try to get the best policy possible on the books. And so I think it's fair to say that if the Liberals want to move forward with it, they should do a proper consultation, and then you can introduce legislation and move forward, hopefully taking out the worst elements, the poison pills. But with just so many groups all across society so concerned, I think that should be a red flag for the Liberal government. There's a lot of parties, actors out there who are normally supportive of the Liberals that are very, very worried about this. And at the very least, I think the Liberals need to show in another minority parliament, not a majority, that they're at least willing to listen to Canadians.
I like you. I like your optimism there. That they need to listen, especially when both friends and critics have concerns. Yes. I will say, though, the first time this stuff came through, nobody expected it. I think nobody really understood it. There was a few people like Professor Geist and others who saw what was there and raised the alarm. There's no sleeping dogs now, though. Even at the Taxpayers Federation, it took us a little while to figure out what was happening. Everybody's awake now. Everybody's looking at it. Everybody's got out the magnifying glass to look for the small print. I think at minimum, going forward, this is going to be a much louder, much more fulsome debate. The government better brace itself, because the rest of us are ready. Jay, thank you so much for jumping on this. You've been all over this from the start. We've got a link to your newspaper column in the National Post. We'll keep that link right in our show notes so people can check it out. And as I say, everybody should stay tuned. I'm pretty sure there's going to be more on this in the coming months.
Absolutely. With a minority government, there's bound to be a fight, and I think we're going to be ready.
All right. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Todd.
Hi, I'm Scott Hennig, President of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. If you've got another minute, I'd like to ask you to think about the one person you know that would really enjoy listening to this podcast. Do us a favor and do them a favor and send them a quick note to let them know about it. At the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we believe there is power in numbers. That's why we've worked so hard to build an army of taxpayers who are ready to push back. And we did it because people like you shared our work with that one person that they knew would really appreciate taking part. Thanks for listening, and thanks for doing your part to make Canada a better place.